Welcome to the Houston Real Estate Talk by Stone and Fields, where we meet with some of the most knowledgeable professionals in the industry.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Houston Real Estate Talk with Stone and Fields. I am Kariliz Perez and I am here today with Alberto Tudela. How are you, Alberto?
I'm doing great, Kariliz. Thanks for having me on your space.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Alberto is from Tudela Insurance Solutions, and what do you tell us about a little bit about yourself?
Sure, be happy to. So my name again is Alberto Tudela. I own an insurance agency. It's an all-state agency. The name of my agency is Tudela Insurance Solutions. It's been a little over 4 years. In April, we just had our 4-year anniversary. So we've been able to weather everything that's happened over these last very interesting 5 years, especially this one. And what can I tell you about myself? I'm married. I have a wonderful wife, 18 years married. I have 2 incredible children that I'm unbelievably proud of, especially now that we've all gotten to know our children a lot better than maybe even we wanted to, since COVID and homeschooling and everything else. But 2 great children. We moved to Houston specifically to open our own business. So prior to that, I lived for 13 years in the Miami area, worked in insurance there for for that 13 years. Prior to that, I was in Venezuela. That's originally where I'm from, born and raised. But I've always had some interesting links to Houston. My mother is Houstonian. We lived here for 4 years when I was very, very young. Came back for college. So there's always been a very important link for Houston and Texas in general with myself and my family.
That's very nice. Very nice. Thank you for that, for telling us a little bit about yourself.
Sure.
How about we talk about homeowners insurance?
Yeah, that's my bread and butter. That's what we do every day.
Wonderful. We have lots of questions, so let's get started. Who needs home insurance?
So the short answer there is everyone. Everyone needs homeowners insurance. And the reason why you need homeowners insurance, you specifically as a realtor, your home is going to be basically your most important asset. It's your biggest debt, and once you pay off that debt, it's most probably your most important asset that you're going to have. Whether that's a $150,000 home or a $2 million or $4 million home and everything in between, it's an important investment for any family to undertake. So you need to protect that investment. Of course, there's different reasons on why you need homeowners insurance, but the short answer is you want to protect your largest investment and make sure that if something catastrophic, especially something catastrophic, and of course we live in Houston, we're close to the coast. We get scares, on a regular basis. We just went through one not that long ago, where we were potentially looking or staring down the barrel of a, potentially Category 4 hurricane. Luckily, that didn't come close to Houston, but, of course, people in Lake Charles have been greatly affected. So you want to make sure that whatever happens to that, if you have some sort of catastrophic situation where your home is completely totaled, okay, that you have some sort of recourse, somebody to help you financially get back on your feet and be able to rebuild that home.
Right. Very scary situation when you have a Category 4 hurricane,
yes.
right?
Wow. And it happens a little more often than I think we'd all like.
And it probably will get worse, right?
Yes, seems that way.
Absolutely. When is required to buy home insurance?
So we talked about who should have. So everybody should have. That's the answer. Now, who has to have? Now, there's a difference between should and obligation, or you have to. So the obligation comes in when you have a lender. Okay, so if there's a third party that's providing you with any kind of a loan, normally, of course, that comes in the form of a mortgage. For most people, it might be a HELOC, home equity line of credit, if you've already got the home paid off and now you're looking at maybe taking some money out of that home, or maybe you're refinancing. There's all of these situations, whatever it is, whether you've got $1 that's still on the lender side, that lender is going to require you to have homeowners insurance. And it's very, very important that you comply with that requirement. Of course, if you don't have that ready for closing time, you're not going to close, number one. And second of all, if something happens to your policy while you are on the loan, the lender is typically listed as a mortgagee clause. They get informed on everything that happens with your homeowner's policy. And if it cancels for whatever reason, what's going to happen is the lender is going to do what's called force-placed insurance on your bill. So through the loan, they're going to charge you for this force-placed insurance. Keep in mind there's very big differences between your homeowner's insurance and the lender-placed insurance. Typically the lender-placed insurance is going to be significantly more expensive, and that's only going to cover the lender's risk. Okay, so it only covers however much the loan is for. It will not cover anything above and beyond that, and what it's going to really take for you to rebuild that home if you need it.
Very interesting. But something that you mentioned, the lender is who requires you to buy the home insurance. If you're buying cash, there's no such requirement, but we still advise our clients to get home insurance to protect their investment, regardless if it's being paid cash or with a loan. Correct?
Absolutely correct. So it should. You should have it, but if
Yes.
you're paying cash, listen, it's at your own risk. If you're comfortable and you have a couple of extra hundreds of thousands of dollars already, you know, you have a $300,000 structure and you have an extra $300,000 that you think that you can, you know, spend in the worst case scenario and you don't want to insure your house, that's definitely your prerogative.
Right, definitely. Should the buyer shop around?
Yes.
Yes.
And this may be a little detrimental to my own position, but
Right.
you know, the truth of the matter is that being an Allstate agency, you know, we have the luxury of representing one of the largest insurance companies in the United States.
Right.
Very, very solid company, over almost practically 100 years of insurance experience, extremely solid from a financial perspective. And of course, that becomes very important when you're talking about homeowners. You know, you don't want to go with a smaller company that if there's a huge situation, if we do get hit with a big hurricane, is that small company going to be able to shoulder the financial responsibility of paying out
Right.
on all of these losses? And not only do they have the financial responsibility, do they have the capacity as well from the claims side standpoint to be able to deal with a flood of claims or a glut of claims? You know, all of a sudden you have to go out and you have to do, you know, reviews, or you send an adjuster to 2,000 homeowners from one moment to the next. And just the reality is a lot of smaller companies are not geared to do that. They're not able to do that. So part of the benefit of having Allstate is that, of course, prices vary. You know, we're not always the least expensive option, but it's a question of value. Some people drive, some people drive a Fiat, some people drive a Bentley, you know, and you have everything in between. And with insurance, it's basically the same thing.
Right, right. And something that you mentioned about smaller agencies having the capacity when there's a catastrophic event, right? And I remember when we went through what happened here in Houston
Harvey.
in 2017, many companies went bankrupt, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true.
And that's definitely why it's so important to do your research and to purchase that insurance with a company that it's nationwide, that it's big and can support when something like that happens, right?
Yeah, my mother always said, you know, you get what you pay for, you know, and normally the differences are not, you know, astronomical. So I always try to explain to my clients what those differences are, what they're really paying for, you know, whether it's an extra $1 a day, really, what are you spending additional to get, you know, a better company, better coverage, a better agency, frankly, because the agency makes a huge difference on what type of service you're going to get.
Right.
Every agency typically is independently run. So I know the way I run my agency. I can't speak to everybody else out there, but I like to have that personal touch with most of my clients.
And most people do want to have that, right? To being able to pick up the phone and call their agent and build that relationship through the years. Because if you're a homeowner for 30 years, you want to have that relationship with someone that you can look at least face to face or every now and then pick up the phone and give them a call, right?
Absolutely, and not only that, it
Yes.
becomes also a very important thing when and if you have a claim. So listen, if you have a catastrophic situation where we're dealing with a hurricane, or you know, we had a strong hailstorm, and you know that you have to file a claim, okay, because you've got significant damages, it's pretty simple. I need to call my insurance carrier, I need to call my agent, I need to start this process.
Right.
The issue starts, or really the value of an agency becomes when there is a smaller issue that happens in the house. Listen, you know, the other day my water heater broke, you know, all the water went everywhere. I was able to sort of get it together, but we need to sort of determine exactly what the damages really are before we take that to the next step and file a claim. Once you file a claim with the insurance carrier, that stays on your record, okay? And basically that goes into a database, and every time you go and you shop around your insurance, they're going to come back with, hey, you made a claim, you know, a year and a half ago, I see that the insurance carrier didn't pay anything out on it because it wasn't, number one, A, not covered, or number two, it was underneath your deductible. The deductible is a very important factor as well. So you need to make sure that if you're going to file a claim, that you want to make sure that the damages are going to be worth it. So in other words, the amount of money that the insurance carrier is going to pay out is significant enough to where it's going to make sense for you to go out and pay your deductible, and the additional increases that you're going to have on your policies come renewal time, whether or not you're with the same company or you move somewhere else, it doesn't matter. You're going to end up paying more because you filed the claim, and that stays on your record, and they're going to rate you accordingly. So for those reasons, you really want to have access to an agent that's capable and ready to help you out in those kinds of situations, whether it's, let's call the AC guy and go out there, let's call the plumber, let's call a restoration company, let's call a roofer and see what's going on specifically, and we'll make a decision on whether or not it's likely that the insurance carrier is going to pay out.
True, very much important that. Tell me about what does the homeowners insurance policy covers?
Okay, so that's another great question. These policies are quite complex, and anybody that's tried to read through it understands that it's probably not, whether it's done like that on purpose or not, it's a bit convoluted the way that they're written. Okay. And you have to have a little bit of, sort of like a lawyer, right? A lawyer, when they have a legal document, there's a lot of things in there that when I read it, I'm like, well, what is this? And it's the same with the policies. Yes. There are a variety of different types of homeowners policies that exist. Okay, the good thing is that typically they're standardized, but you do have about 5 different types of homeowners policies. Okay. So when you're comparing one policy to the other, you might not be comparing the same types of policies, which means that you're not really comparing apples to apples. You might be comparing, you might have a policy like an HOB or an HO3 policy. These are designations that are set by the state. And the entity that basically standardizes these policies that are all more inclusive than others that are out there that exist, and that might be a lot less expensive because ultimately these coverages determine really how expensive these policies are going to be. So you want to talk with a professional that understands that and that knows those differences, and whether or not that's important to you. Do you really need that additional coverage, or do you want to go with something that's more pared down, more manageable? We always recommend, of course, the highest level of coverage because you never know what can happen, and it's important that you protect your assets.
Absolutely.
So, but in short, basically anything that's sudden and accidental is typically going to be covered by your homeowner's insurance. So whether that's a pipe that bursts all of a sudden out of nowhere, whether it's a hailstorm that happened, a hurricane, of course, although we are pretty far south and there are policies that exclude wind coverage. So it's very, very important that you also make sure, especially in Houston, and particularly on the southern side of Houston, that you're covered for wind and hurricanes, because some policies do exclude that. Ah. But sudden and accidental is pretty much sort of the broad definition of what's covered, but it really depends on the case.
Correct. Flood insurance is not included in that standard policy. So tell me a little bit about flood insurance. Who should buy flood insurance, and why do you think everybody should have flood insurance? Sure.
So you're absolutely right. Being a realtor, you know these things. Yeah. Flood insurance is a whole separate policy. There really doesn't exist a private company that has a flood insurance program. There are a couple that have excess flood, but most of the people that have flood insurance policies get it through the NFIP. The NFIP is the National Flood Insurance Program, and that program is managed by FEMA. Okay. FEMA is obviously the federal entity, government entity that manages and handles catastrophes. Okay? So Federal Emergency Management Agency. The reason why you can only get it from them is because what it would really cost you through a private company would be significantly more, okay, than what you can get it for from the NFIP or FEMA. Okay, so they have regulated rates. It literally takes an act of Congress, or practically an act of Congress, in order for them to make changes and adjustments to that program because it is federal. Okay. So it's a great way for you to get great coverage for an extremely reduced price, especially here in Houston. We know that our number one catastrophe is flood. The number one catastrophe nationwide And the type of catastrophe that causes the most amount of damage nationwide is flood as well. So it's not fires, it's not hurricanes, you know, those things are sort of punctual and they sort of come and go, but floods are constant, okay? And they happen all over the United States. So being in Houston, knowing that we've had 3 major floods in the last, I think it's been, what, 7 years? You know, with the Tax Day flood, the Memorial Day flood, and of course Harvey. It seems like they all happen on a special date too. You have to have the special
holidays.
Designation, you know. And it's extremely important for pretty much everyone in Houston to have flood. Now, for some people, it's required. If you have a lender and there's a you know, a lender in the middle of it, and you live in what's called a flood zone. So in other words, a zone that has a certain percentage of risk that's higher than the average, the lender's going to require you to have flood. Okay, and those go a different way. You want to have an elevation certificate for that to see where your house sits in comparison to what's called the base flood elevation for the area. So that determines how likely you are to flood your particular house. And then you have people that are not in that flood zone that pay basically a standardized rate. You know, we're talking about, for maximum limits on flood, we're talking about $250,000 worth of coverage for your structure, $100,000 worth of coverage for your property, your personal property. And on a non-standard preferred policy, we're talking about a yearly cost about $518 a year, I think it is now. They recently changed them, but it's extremely inexpensive when you really look at it. So I recommend everybody in the Houston area, especially if you're south of Houston, even more so, even if you're north of Houston. We saw some flooding in Kingwood. There was some flooding. I mean, there's been flooding everywhere, really, when you come down to it. So it's very, very important. Even if your bank doesn't require it, consider it, and I would recommend that you get it. It's not expensive, and you're protecting the most important asset from one of the most common perils that are out there.
True. You mentioned rates, especially on the flood. Tell me a little bit about how are the rates calculated in general for those policies?
Yeah, so rates are set by the insurance carriers. Okay, so insurance, we're talking about a regulated market. So there's actually an entity that regulates all of the insurance carriers that operate in Texas. That's the Texas Department of Insurance. All of the insurance carriers basically send them the rates, and they say, here's what we want to, you know, here's the way that we're going to charge for our policies. Now, the way they charge these rates, it's very convoluted. It's not simple. It's not easy, just like, oh, okay, it costs A, B, and C. Sometimes I get clients, and they call in and they say, you know, I want a quote on my house. I said, well, I need your information. Well, I don't want to give you my information. Well, frankly, if you don't give me your information, I can't provide you a quote because all of those things are factored into the price of the policy. So there's the actual concrete risk, the house itself. What kind of house is it? When was it built? What kind of roof does it have on it? What kind of finishes do you have on the interior? Because, of course, you can have a basic kitchen, and you can have a kitchen where you have, you know, Wolf and Sub-Zero appliances, where each appliance costs, you know, $10,000, $15,000. So you can't just compare everybody the same or measure everybody by the same yardstick. There's no ballpark. Everything is specific. It's all personalized. So we take into account the home itself. We take into account where that home is located geographically, you know, and we also take into account who owns that home. So is this person, you know, responsible? Have they filed a bunch of claims in the past? You know, what does their history look like? Have they been responsible with their insurance? Have they maintained their insurance for a long period of time? Or did they not have insurance and all of a sudden they're calling for an insurance policy today? Or, well, I wonder why they're calling now. Is it something happened and they want to have a carrier to try to then file a claim a couple of weeks from now? So all of those things go into the price that you pay.
I see. That's very interesting. I didn't even think about that you just mentioned about, you know, they file the claim later, 2 weeks later or something like that. It's very
It does happen.
It does happen. There's a little bit of everything
Unfortunately,
out there.
you know, and when insurance carriers pay out on those types of situations, ultimately everybody else pays too.
That's
right?
true.
Because we're all lumped into, you know, it's, you know, if you want to talk about like herd immunity, right? We're talking about coronavirus and this herd immunity. Insurance works in this sort of the same way. You know, we're insuring a lot of people to try to maintain the price as low as possible. So we're spreading out the risk throughout as many people as possible. But if, you know, the higher the claims, you know, ultimately the more we're all going to pay.
That's true. So how can buyers or homeowners save on home insurance?
So there's a lot of different ways that they can save on homeowners insurance. The first one would be to have a great agent that's going to be looking out for their best interest, specifically on the discounts that we're able to provide. Okay, so like I said, the rates are filed with the state. However, there are always discounts that are available. So you might be able to bundle your home and your auto and get maybe 2, 3, I've even had people save up to $600 on their homeowners insurance by having their auto insurance with the same company. There are other things that factor into that, but it's really up to, it's the type of homeowners insurance and what type of discounts they offer. It's how responsible you've been in the past with everything. You know, having prior insurance is one of the big ones. Of course, if you're talking about a new homeowner, you know, a new buyer, that doesn't really apply. But those are typically the best ways that you can try to save a little bit on homeowners.
That's very good. Tell me about, how does homeowners insurance differ from renter's insurance? Because if you're, obviously as a realtor, as a broker, we deal with both parts of the transactions, right?
Sure.
Sometimes the landlord, sometimes the tenant, and sometimes the buyer. So,
Right.
Can you tell
Yeah,
me?
so that's a great question.
Yes.
So of course there's a lot of renters in Houston. You know, not everybody has is lucky enough to own their own home. And renter's insurance is very different than homeowners insurance. First of all, financially speaking, as far as what it costs, it's really a very small fraction of what it typically a homeowner's policy will cost. And the reason for that is the amount of risk for the insurance carrier is significantly less. So the main difference there is that on a homeowner's policy, of course, you're insuring the structure, you're insuring the whole home, along with contents, and you're insuring a third part, which is very important too, which a lot of people overlook, which is liability.
Right.
The liability is the risk that you have for living in that particular place. So if you have somebody that comes over to your house, let's say you have a dog, your dog bites that person, and then they want to sue you. And they say, you know, your dog bit me, and, you know, it's costing me, you know, I need to get surgery, you know, they bit me on the cheek, and I have to go get reconstructive surgery. I mean, I've seen everything.
Wow.
It can be very expensive. It could be hundreds of thousands of dollars that you can end up having to pay for negligence, for liability. So your homeowner's insurance and your renter's insurance both cover you for those types of situations.
Okay.
Most renters, especially if you're living in a rental community, it's mandatory for you to have a renter's policy.
Yes.
And it's not because the property management company is worried about your stuff. Not at all. They are worried about their liability situation, and if something were to happen in their unit where you have that leased, something happens there, they want to sue the property manager or the owner of the building, and so they want to put a little bit of something in place just in case that happens.
A little cushion just in case.
And then the last thing I'll say about that is that, of course, the renter's policies only covers your personal property. So whatever you moved in with, your furniture, your clothes, your electronic equipment, all of the things in your kitchen, which a lot of people don't realize really how much money they've got tied up in just their kitchen. Pots, pans, silverware, glasses, dishes, everything. It's a lot of money.
Right.
So you're insuring your personal property on a renter's policy. So personal property, liability, that's pretty much what it is on a renter's. And then you have the additional things on the homeowner side.
Right. And it's funny because it happened to me that I'm working with a tenant and I say you're required to have renter's insurance, and they think they're going to be taking care of the whole house.
Right.
Oh, I'm going to be paying for the home insurance for the whole house. No,
Right. Why should I do that for the owner?
Yes, exactly. The owner should do that. So let it be clear that the owner of the property still have the homeowner's insurance for any damage of the structure of the house itself, if there's a hurricane or whatever catastrophic something happens.
Yeah.
And the tenant is just getting the renter's insurance to protect their belongings and in case that something happens in the property when they're renting.
Another thing that you just brought up, so people that have a rental property, okay, as an income property, it's very important. You don't really have a homeowner's policy on your rental property. You have what we call a landlord policy. And there are differences between a homeowner's policy and a landlord policy, because the main difference being you own and live in your homeowner's policy. Okay, you have to be a resident of your property in order for it to be considered a homeowner's. So if you have another property that's rental, then you're talking about a landlord policy. Of course, if you're lucky enough to have a second home, you know, or a vacation property, that's also a homeowner's policy. So all of these designations make a huge difference, because if you're choosing, you know, I had a couple that recently, you know, they were transferred out to another country. So they put up their house for rent, and then they called me, oh, well, we moved. You know, we're not living there anymore. I said, well, why haven't why haven't you called me and told me about this?
Right.
You know, we really need to look at your policy and make the changes. Oh, we're renting it out, you know, a month from now. I said, okay, that's super important, even more so now, because we need to change the type of policy that you have. If you have a homeowner's policy on a landlord type situation, it is possible that the insurance carrier may deny your claim.
Oh.
Say, you have a different, you know, you're not covered because it's misrepresented and you don't live in this home. So we're not going to pay anything. And part of my job as an agent is to make sure that that doesn't happen, of course.
Right. Tell me about Airbnb. What type of policy would somebody with an Airbnb property, you know, that it's more like an investment, but it's not an actual tenant for a whole year occupying the property?
Yeah, those are things that have come up
tricky.
recently. It is
Yes.
tricky, and it's, you know, it's very interesting. I do have some clients that are like that. So a lot of clients. So recently, for example, I have several clients that have bought houses in Galveston.
Okay.
Actually, recently I talked to somebody, and basically what's happening is with the coronavirus, you know, we're not able to normally travel internationally or even nationally. So people, what are they doing? They're taking road trips. They're going to the hill country, they're going to Galveston for the weekend, for a week, and that's how people are taking their vacation. So there's been an explosion of, say, activity as far as Airbnbs are concerned and these short-term rentals. So even clients that they've only used this for their personal use are now renting these out. Because it's like I can't ignore the financial, you know, benefits of renting this out every once in a while. And it depends. So if you're doing it 100% for just rental, then it's a landlord policy, but you have to have a specific clause in there that allows you, the underwriting guidelines will allow you to rent it out on a short-term basis. Okay. If it's still primarily your vacation house, but you're taking advantage of Airbnb and maybe you're renting it out, you know, out of the 52 weeks of the year, you rent it out, you know, 20 weeks. Okay. It can still be a homeowner's policy, but you do have to have a special clause in there that states that you're able to do short-term rentals. Okay. So those are all little details that also become very, very important as far as eligibility of the client, what type of policy you need, which insurance carriers are offering that. Yes. You know, in those cases, Allstate doesn't do that. So I have access to about 5 or 6 different carriers that can accommodate that type of a situation.
That's really good to know. And actually, pretty much what we're saying is communicate with your agent and let them know what's your intention with that property when you're buying or when you're moving out or whatever the case might be, that your family situation, your setup changes.
Yes.
Communication is key in everything we do, right?
Absolutely.
So it helps a lot. Is there anything else that you would like to share that it's important for those who are either considering of buying a home, moving and leasing, or whatever the case might be?
So, yes, you know, shop around. Look at your options. You know, call an independent agent, call a captive agent, call the big companies, call the small companies. Talk to the agency or the salespeople that are there to help you. Try to gauge whether or not they know what they're talking about. Try to see if they're going to really provide you with service. Okay, what I would definitely not recommend is, some sort of automated service. Don't go online and put in your information and say, this is what I need. Boom, 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 I'm ready. Here's my quote. I'm ready to bind it myself without any kind of expertise, without any kind of advice from a licensed agent. Remember, we have to be licensed in order to sell insurance. You know, we went through a course, we had to take a test. There's knowledge that we need to have in order to properly advise our customers. So when you go online and you're just looking around, chances are you don't know what an insurance agent knows, and all their years of business doing this. So make sure that you have good advice. Right. Okay. So, and hopefully you'll call me. You know, and I can provide that advice. And whether or not you choose to do business with Allstate and our agency or go somewhere else, I can guarantee you that you're probably going to learn something along the way.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for all these valuable information, and thank you everyone who's been listening and watching us at the Houston Real Estate Talk. What's your phone number, Alberto?
Oh, so you can reach me at 713-714-4475, or you can also email us Tudela, that's A as in Apple, T as in Thomas, U, D as in David, ELA, @allstate.com, or you just Google us, Tudela Insurance Solutions. Our offices are located on 4108 Bel Air Boulevard, That's basically right between Bel Air and West U. But we do business in all Texas. So wherever you're watching from, as long as it's in Texas, we can probably help you.
Wonderful. Thank you again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you,
Alberto.
Kariliz. I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Don't forget to share and join us on all our social platforms at Stone & Fields.